you serve as DDG of the WTO. Since then, you also work very hard to bring your friends and colleagues together for real discussions about WTO's future. So can you maybe share with us your brief thoughts on our topic? What are the priority issues that need to be resolved ASAP?
Anyway, I think there is already a consensus among all WTO members that the WTO needs reform. There's no question about it. But there remains very significant divergence on the priorities of reform. I would touch upon the most urgent crises and challenges faced by the WTO. Given the global reciprocal tariff war poses an existential threat to the WTO, I believe that addressing this issue should be the most urgent task on the WTO reform. As we see recently that the US has forced some members to reach bilateral deals. They are not even called agreements, but deals. As a result, a power-based trade relationship is gradually eroding multilateral trading system. These so-called bilateral deals not only severely harm the economic interests of those countries which are forced to sign them, but could also spell death knell. Maybe I'm a little bit exaggerating, but because this new order clearly would not be based on multilateral rules, but instead seek to ensure America first and American exceptionism. Under this temporary system, the WTO would be ignored and marginalized, and the trade bullying would become the new normal. They are compelled to accept these unfair agreements, it's clear. However, these bilateral deals not only harm the interests of those countries themselves, but also fundamentally undermine the multilateral trading system while sacrificing the third countries' interests. So I'm also worried that they even deny that those bilateral deals could fall under the WTO dispute settlement mechanism. That will effectively drive the last nail into the coffin of the WTO dispute settlement system, leaving the WTO to a tasteless talk shop. Finally, there has been a major question lingering in my mind. After accepting this temporary agreement, do these major players continue to be willing to defend multilateral rules as they did in the past? So based on these concerns, I believe that the goal must be damage control. We should preserve as much of the existing system as possible.
Ambassador Jara, tell me more about your thoughts. Why WTO is fundamentally important still? And why is your colleague, Ambassador Yi, so eagerly try to preserve what's already existing and try to make damage control? Do you agree with him?
And you, Ms. Tian, you mentioned earlier two words, unpredictability and instability. And I think not only developing countries, but I think all countries and all companies want stability, they want predictability. And that has been under attack lately by this trade war. And I think that the ones that suffered the most when these things happened are precisely the poorer, weaker members of the system. They only have the rules that protected by a dispute settlement to protect themselves from actions by the stronger. So I think that the system is crucial, is vital, is essential. And I see now what's happening, I think proves the point. The United States accounts for, what, 13, 15% of world trade. I don't see the other 85% of world trade going the way the United States. I think that countries, the rest of the world in their trade are sticking to WTO rules or to bilateral rules or regional rules. And the system has always, since 1947, worked like a river, finding its way to the ocean. When there's an obstacle, it will go around. In 1985-86, some countries were blocking, particularly India and Brazil, the launching of a new round. A group of members went away. They brought around like-minded countries and started to work for the preparations of the launching of a new round. Eventually they expanded, others joined, and it happened. Then there was a very strong force that the opposition could not overcome. And I am pretty sure that in the future also the like-minded countries, in whatever shape they will start talking, I think they already are doing it in many ways, in order to commit themselves to abide by the rules of the game and to start talking about themselves about how to reform the system. So the river is finding its way.
All right, so let's go to Mr. Lu. Are they there to think? Are they there to act? I mean, I should ask you that question because you are based in Geneva for years. And with your group, you certainly bring in a lot of different voices on where trade should be going. Tell us more about your thoughts.
In Geneva, the discussion, the context of our discussion on WTO reform is very much similar to what we are doing here. We talk about global turbulence, we talk about geopolitical tensions, we talk about the greater uncertainty for business to do business, to plan for long term, so on and so forth. The thing is that the discussion is going on very intensified way among ambassadors, between a group and ambassadors, and the process is quite complicated. It touches upon a whole variety of issues. But there are two things I think out of this complication, things I think will be important to note. The first thing is that the majority of the members and ambassadors are still very much committed to the WTO and the system and its basic rules. They say that it is a force for good in facilitating and in enabling global trade. And the second thing is that there's a strong sense of urgency and to promote WTO reform and to sustain WTO and to make the system better. So I think that's an important thing. Potential solutions, we don't yet have a magic wand, but there are possibly some emerging kind of ideas or way for the way forward. The first thing is about leadership. When some certain major player is foregoing its traditional leadership role, and we are discussing in Geneva very much this so-called collective leadership. And if these kind of initiatives could be mutually open to each other and mutually connected to each other, this could be a kind of bridge builder and also pathfinder for WTO reform. The second thing, as we are discussing here, plurilateralism is more or less the way forward for the majority of the members, and it has to be open, which means that a small group of like-minded group members should go ahead in making new rules, 21st century challengers, so on and so forth. And we already have great successful stories. There are about 18 plurilaterals going on in the WTO. Some are already concluded, like investment facilitation for development, e-commerce, service domestic regulation, and also the MPI, which replaced the paralyzed appellate body. The third thing is that while some of those initiatives already concluded plurilaterally, are blocked by certain members, there is a strong appeal of just do it. Let's do it on a voluntary basis. So like on e-commerce, I think China has announced not long ago that they will start to implement the WTO e-commerce new rules in Beijing. And also there's a discussion between China and Australia and others on how to implement investment facilitation, so on and so forth, which I think is the right way forward. The last point is, of course, how about development? Because WTO has, the majority of them are developing countries. In my interaction with the developing countries, especially African ones, There's a strong concern about that when you go ahead plurilateral, you cannot leave us, the majority, behind. So I think that's also something we need to find on how to do it. I think EU is doing a lot, China is doing a lot. I think we need more targeted aid for trade to help developed countries so we avoid a kind of the traditional digital divide and potentially another AI divide or whatever, a climate change divide, so that we could bring the developed countries all along with us. I think that's also another thing we need to bear in mind on the way forward.
Does WTO still have the capability that you wish it had to do the priority of things that you have beautifully lined up for it? Ambassador Yi, please.
Look at the current rising protectionism and unilateralism. I guess even WTO reform, the term of the reform can be used for some protectionist measures. Think about reform in China. The word reform is a very sacred one. It always goes hand in hand with openness. But in the WTO context, it's pretty neutral. It just means change. Any changes to the multilateral rules can be seen as reform. So we need to keep our eyes open to make sure that those reforms will be going in the right direction. Trade liberalization, multilateralism, most favored nation treatment, dispute settlement. I think all those core principles or cornerstones cannot be sacrificed during the so-called WTO reform. I think the members have to think big. They need to make a decisive decision to keep multilateral trading system continuing to be liberal and multilateral.
Appreciate it. Ambassador Jara.
Such is the political situation now that I don't see it's possible to do anything from within the WTO at this point in time. What you need to do is to establish a credible political process for negotiations to take place. Okay? If that can't be done within the WTO, you have to wait for the right time to do it. And in politics, things happen because of pressures. And therefore, that's when I think that the like-minded countries have to start to get together to think about these issues and to think about a process, organization of the negotiations, open, multilateral. But it's not that they're going to negotiate among themselves and create something, but it's something that in the appropriate time, they will bring everything back to the WTO, okay? If India and the United States are not in a position to do it right now, there's nothing you can do. You can take the horse to the water, but you cannot force it to drink, right? So that's something which I intended to say by my comments, not to create a parallel system, but to do something to start thinking about. Now, we know more or less the issues that have to be negotiated, that have to be reformed. We know how to do it. Maybe except in two areas. One is subsidies. We have to do a lot more thinking. And all the people in universities and think tanks like Bernard and others have to think about that. And the other ones closely associated with that, state-owned enterprises. We need a technological breakthrough, if you will, to learn, to devise new disciplines, more effective, in order to give trust and confidence to the world economy to operate.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Jara. Anything to comment, Ambassador Yi?
In my view, if the US remains skeptical or even hostile toward an open and rules-based system, the best way for others to highlight the value of trade opening and the relevance of the WTO is to demonstrate that they are committed to moving forward with or without the US.
We are seeing the US is not suggesting, at least the administration, not suggesting exit from WTO. Meanwhile, there are also figures being sent with American nationality becoming the DDG of WTO now. So how do you see this very interesting combination? On the one hand, more unilateral approach, but on the other hand, not exiting. Ambassador Jara?
We know the United States, and not now, I mean, it's been there for a long time now, for almost 10 years, has increasingly applied measures under both Democrat and Republican administrations, which are not, let's say, in conformity with or in coherence with the system. Mm. Still, they might have touched some value because, as you said, there's a DDG from the United States, and they still wield some influence, et cetera, et cetera. So they must have an interest in keeping an eye on what's happening.
Right. How do you look at these details, Ambassador Yi?
The multilateral trade rules used to be seen as sacred as Bible. But now we sadly see that it has almost no real power over the largest economy. But although we cannot control the policy in the US, they have their own domestic politics. But what we can do is we just keep ourselves doing everything within the WTO framework. We want to abide by the WTO rules. If the majority members can show that kind of resilience, I guess WTO will survive, and maybe in 8, 10, or 15 years, we will see the US is reluctantly back to the multilateral system.
Go to you, Mr. Lu. On another note, earlier we have already seen the discussions about what is the WTO vis-a-vis other regional and different plurilateral arrangements. What do you think will be the future, the relationship between the two, particularly when the WTO is undergoing reform process?
WTO in the future would have to be more agile, more flexible, and more pragmatic, and probably with different variable geometry, and even with multi-speed. And when we were discussing about whether we can do something without US, and this is already happening. We already have MPI without US. We have many plurilaterals without India, and potentially in the future we'll have something without other major players. So this is the thing we have to be pragmatic about. The second thing, I think Bernard made a very good point on the RTAs, FTAs, which is a good instrument for trade integration. This is, of course, already allowed by WTO rules, GATT 24, GATT for Article 5. But beyond that, experts always say that the RTAs and FTAs should also be a kind of experimental process, a kind of to test some new policies, like CPTPP on state-owned prices, on many other things, and for more liberalization, investment facilitation. The only thing we are not seeing is that we always say WTO and regional initiatives are like two legs. They should work together. But now probably the regional leg is moving ahead very quickly. You see EU going around the world signing new agreements. China is doing the same thing. India is doing the same thing. But the WTO leg is slowing down. So I think that's not sustainable. So coming back to what I want to say, if we could find a way even among smaller group of countries which are part of CPTPP, EU, China, and others, could put all these so-called high-level 21st century standards of the rules, of the trade rules, put them together, test amongst a small group. That will be a kind of quasi-multilateralization of the trade rules and move WTO ahead.
Thank you very much. For me, it's so hard to say. We have to wrap it up. Before we do that, any keywords or guiding lines, that guiding principles you think should be instilled in the road ahead, whether it's WTO reform or all of us working together for trade? Ambassador Yi.
WTO is essential. Trade is not a zero-sum game. WTO is imperative for nations to share in the future.
Thank you so much, sir. Ambassador Jara.
So I see in, I don't know what period of time, the United States changing course and coming back and to take its position at the table and again exercising the leadership it has been doing. But we have to let that process unfold economically, and that will create the political pressure in order to bring change about. And maybe we can then have a very good multilateral system again.
And Mr. Lu, thank you. Your thoughts?
Action, action, action. Try to do something. If you cannot do in a big group, do in a small group. If you cannot do it in the WTO, do it outside the WTO. Sooner or later, other members or countries will join because they will learn from the history. We have already seen in the past, like we discussing, we have suffered in the past. We're going to suffer again. So people will come back. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of your input. Really appreciate it. Thank you. 谢谢.